Rise of Hawk, Part 4, Scene 7. Sharon Cody Sr. sat back in the desk chair with his coffee and admired the awards and merits that littered the walls of his office. It was his lunch break, and even though his useless assistant hadn't come yet with his food, he was going to enjoy what little free time he had. His grandson had disappointed him. Ungrateful whelp. Ice Blue Eyes narrowed. Well, you'll learn your lesson, and you'd better come back suitably chastened. A knock sounded on his door, and it was too confident to be his worthless assistant. He sighed, lifted his feet from his desk, and put his coffee down. "Come," he barked. The broad, dark wood door opened fast and banged against the wall as his younger son strode through. Sharon didn't need to be an empath to realize his son was mad with him. He suppressed the smirk. He'll demand I release his son, and I'll finally know if the boy is loyal to me, or if he's been playing me for all of these years. The boy strode up to his desk and dumped something on its broad surface. Blood splattered papers and his suit shirt, and Geron swore at the sudden mess. "Your spy's heir, father." The boy spoke between gritted teeth. Geron snorted and looked at the roughly cut piece of flesh sitting on the desk. "My spy? Really? Which one?" "Agent Garin." "You're angry about the child, aren't you?" He kept his voice deceptively nonchalant. "Why take it out on Agent Garin? Is he alive, or am I going to have to sign another MIA because of you?" "I don't care about some sothan child with delusions of grandeur. I care about you micromanaging my operation from your sothan desk chair." Sharon lifted an eyebrow at the boy. "Delusions of grandeur?" The boy scoffed. "Thinking he was my son? My child is dead." Sharon suppressed a little internal squeal of glee. Even with that woman's eyes and face, his son didn't recognize his own flesh. "No, actually, my grandson lived, and today he broke a number of laws to find you." Shock on his son's face was worth the possible tantrum of admitting he'd lied to him for 9 years. "That child was telling the truth?" Dobert's voice was cautious. "Yes." Sharon silently dared his son to react badly. The young man's face hovered in a state of shock for a number of moments, and Sharon waited for him to lose control. "Well, I appreciate the lies for all this time." There was a spark of anger underneath the sarcasm. "But I'm not here to discuss the child. If I find another spy in my territory," his voice lowered into his familiar hostile growl, "I will bring their head to you next time. Stop treating me like I'm a jackass kid. I'm 31 years old. I do not need you micromanaging my operations, nor do I need you tipping off the rebels to the agency presence in the cathedral with your unfounded paranoia." Dober turned around and stalked back towards the door. His son had recovered from the surprise well. Too well. "Wolf was going to the same desert training base as you did." He couldn't suppress the smirk. "I wonder if he'll break as many bones." The face that turned back to him was ice cold, but neither hostile nor angry. Sharon lifted a challenging eyebrow. "The child went against procedure. He did so knowingly. Whether or not he is my son, he needs to learn the consequences of his actions. He's lucky you didn't decide to execute him as a traitor. Perhaps, once he's learned his lesson, he'll grow up to become a better agent." "If he survives," Sharon added, barely able to suppress the glee in his voice. He loved poking the old wounds of his sons and watching them squirm weakly under his thumb. There was an almost imperceptible jaw clench, and Dober's voice was utterly calm. "My operation is more important than your paranoia, father. If you do not take the threats to my cover out of my territory, I will." His voice dropped into an almost correcting tone. "And for nearest sakes, go and tinker with Junior's insecurities. I'm too busy to play your mind games today." When the door closed, Jaron waited until he no longer sensed the mental shield of his son, and let out a bellowed laughter. If his younger son was deceiving him, he was almost flawless in his duplicity. Since Jaron knew no one could match his own deviousness, it was more than likely that Dobert wasn't disloyal. However, it was still fun to try and rankle him. He chuckled again and lifted his feet back up onto the desk. Scene 8. Asha watched her old friend pace back and forward across the empty space. David was agitated, more so than she'd seen him for a long time. She gave him a smirk. "You digging a hole there, Dobe?" Glancing sideways at her, his frown of stressed confusion took far too long to lift. His smile was forced, and it was then, when he looked directly at her, that she saw the agony he was in. "What happened?" she said quietly. He swallowed. "I found out who Wolf Millar is." She shook her head. "And?" "My son." Tears lifted into his eyes, and she realized why he was so upset. "They took him, didn't they?" He nodded. "He's going to the desert." His voice broke. "Same place as us." The mother in her flared up. "Well, don't just stand there like a wet blanket. Go and get him." "I can't." "That is a whole heap of mammon." She pointed at him. "You are the head son. You're the scary one. You can do almost anything in the agency." He put his hands on his hips. "I could, yes, but if I defy father on anything this big, it'll be over. I cannot sacrifice 3,000 rebels for my son." "Well," she sighed, "well, to be fair, Joan couldn't get all of us." He brushed his light hair with one hand and smirked. "He'd sure try." Sounds of shoes on wood floorboards broke the spell in the room. Both of them straightened and put on their respective social masks, one of a confident, all-knowing general, and the other his strong, loyal second. Their primary cell had expanded to nearly 30 people over the 6 years since the night. There were only 6 of them, and they had ice cream in the sitting room of Rose Road. Most of the time, the primary cell wasn't actually its own entity. There was no building where they all lived, and they weren't on the supply trade roster. It became something separate only in the times when Hawke called a meeting to orientate the actions of the other Aram cells, or if there was a special mission that needed their input. The door opened, and 18 tired, cold, and probably hungry rebels wandered into the empty room. Asha smiled at her older brother and Nama as they entered. Stepping through after the two men was Amana, from the original cell, who leaned in for a quick hug. The group sat down haphazardly on the floor. The room didn't have a fireplace, nor did it have curtains, so it got cold quickly as the sun left its windows. Many of them already knew this and brought their own warmth in the form of blankets. Space wasn't particularly special, just another empty part of Nama's cell building. But it was a decent size, and the walls were filled with suppressant insulation. Dober did not pace under their scrutiny. He was utterly calm, in that spooky way he was so good at. Some days she envied his emotional control. Other days she felt sorry for him, because he couldn't just feel his own emotions and be himself. But on that particular evening she was glad of it. Even though this rebel group knew him well enough to understand that he wasn't some all-knowing deity, they still put him on a pedestal, and, without his ability to hide his emotions, they would soon knock him off it. He waited silently in this calm until every single member of their cell was seated on the floor. The door closed, and he took a breath to speak. The energy in the room shifted as his empathic blue faded into a cloud of black static, which rolled out to the walls like a buzzing storm cloud. His face seemed to age in decades. She wondered for the 10th time if he was aware of how much his energy shifted when he spoke as Hawke. His voice was quiet, almost gentle, but at the same time commanding. "Welcome. Thank you for coming at such short notice. The next stage of our attack on the agency is about to start. Our attack plan—" He paused, and if she didn't know any better, she'd think he was pausing for effect. "Is to plant an explosive device in the Azero Council chambers." There were gasps of surprise and incredulity in the room, and he waited patiently for them to be quiet again. "As you can imagine, this is going to be quite a complicated operation. Our main priority will be to ensure our non-combatants are safe. In the aftermath of this attack, the agency will come down hard on the rebels, and those who do not move out of the city beforehand will be taken out." He paused as if thinking carefully about his words. "The first stage of the evacuation will be moving all non-combatants to the outlying towns, but I will need as many as 10 combat members from each of your cells to remain in Aram until the final evacuation to help support the attack. However, I only want volunteers. This goes for every single one of you as well. If you do not wish to participate, you are not obligated to remain in Aram. Considering what we're planning to do, I'll understand if you wish to opt out of the actual attack. That said, I would like to continue relying on your discretion. We do not want this to leak back to the agency. I'm sure each of you have the diplomacy to facilitate choosing. A shimmer of black pulsed out of him like a chime of a grandfather clock. Asha grunted as a bolt of itching static shot through her feet and up her spine. As she swayed under the pulsing waves of static and put her hand to the wall to steady herself, she heard swearing and groaning from some of the other Timesai in the room. There were several layers to the pulse. One was sharp and travelled up and down her spine like a cleaver. Another, lighter layer brushed tickling and tingling sensations over the surface of her body. And the most painful layer was a resounding wave, which felt like a giant metal bell vibrating her very core and seemingly every atom in the room. There was one final massive bell chime, and the other sensations flitted away into nothing. She sighed in relief and opened her eyes again. Talon, who stood across the room by the door, looked pale as if he was about to vomit. She gave him a sympathetic smile. Hawk cleared his throat. I apologize for the interruption. Unfortunately, we have more pressing issues to attend to. Nama, Talon, I need you to go downstairs right now and start the prep work for a combat mission. I'll give you more instructions soon. Everyone else, go home and instruct your cell leaders to open their evacuation instructions. We'll meet back here again in a week to continue this meeting. He bowed his head formally. Thank you all. Asha stood next to him and watched the others slowly shuffle out of the room. Neither she nor Dobard moved until they were alone again. The door closed and she turned to face him. She still felt dizzy and itchy, but he looked just as focused and calm as if nothing of importance had happened. He recovered so quickly from the static waves. She almost wanted to slap him to share some of her discomfort. He seemed to read her mood. You all right? She smirked. Nothing a couple of margaritas wouldn't fix. So, what are we doing? While Nama and Talon are travelling west to Naradan, you and I are going hunting. You have the combination for the weapons store at Rose Road? Yes, sir, she replied automatically. Good. We leave tonight, but I've got something else I have to do first. Can you pack for both of us? Of course, she frowned. But who are we hunting? Bana, and it's not going to be easy. She snorted. No kidding. Scene 9. Triandrina sat on her bedroom floor in the dark. She wrapped her arms around her arthritic knees and leaned back against the wall. She knew without a doubt that it hadn't been little Ghost who betrayed her. The boy would have done everything he possibly could to keep her safe. Unfortunately, no matter who had told Sharon about Wolf and Dobard, she was still on suspension and facing a trial. They charged her with releasing classified information to firstly a minor and secondly an agent of lower rank. The council was deliberating, and without her voting against him, Sharon now had the majority in the council. Ordinarily, the punishment for this sort of offence was a slap on the wrist. However paranoid and self-obsessed as he was, Sharon would want her convicted and killed as a traitor, if only as revenge for all of the trouble she'd caused him over the years. She didn't want to die, but she didn't regret her decision either. No matter what Sharon had transformed him into, Dobard deserved to know that his son survived, and that poor little boy deserved to not feel utterly alone in the world. She sighed and pulled her legs closer into her body. Whatever would come, she would try to face it with a modicum of pride and grace, even if she faced death. In the parlour beyond her bedroom, someone knocked on the front door. There was no empathic sense of the person knocking, not even a sense of their consciousness. This meant it was a person who was trained as an assassin. And at such a late hour, it also meant that the council had come to their decision. She wouldn't answer it. If they wanted in, they were going to have to break into her apartment. And for most people, that would take time. The silent alarm triggered a small red LED on the wall next to her bedroom door. Seeing the blinking light, she stifled a cry of fear with one hand. Whoever the assassin was, they were very good. There was neither sound nor sense of their presence, but the door in front of her opened very slowly. A dark shadow moved out of the black and entered her bedroom. Trying desperately not to submit to her terror, she watched the figure. Death would come at any moment from somewhere in the darkness via a muffled flash. She wanted to look it in the eyes. Light turned on above her, and she blinked back the sudden bright sheet of white that filled the room. As her eyes adjusted, she saw a dark figure stepped closer and kneeled down in front of her. She looked directly into eyes of vivid blue. A choke of terror escaped her. They sent you, David? No, I asked to be the one to do it. She suppressed a sob. Do you hate me that much for lying, do you? He wiped away her tears with the palm of one hand. Through the physical touch, she sensed no hatred or hostility. He was utterly calm, if not affectionate towards her. No, Trian, I'm here to save your life. No, her eyes widened. David, you can't defy him like that. Please don't sacrifice everything just for me. He smiled and shook his head. Don't worry. I have a plan that will work. But you have to completely trust me. Do you trust me, Trian? He was open empathically. She sensed the boy she had known, not the nightmare agent called Enigma. A frown flickered through her face. Perhaps he had been playing Geran for these last 10 years. Perhaps the boy she had watched grow up had survived Sarah's death. If he really was her little Dobe, there was no doubt in her mind. Yes, David, of course I trust you. He lifted one long-fingered hand towards her, and she took it. She pulled her up from the floor to her feet. I brought with me a friend who can help make you into a convincing corpse. Her name is Karen Freen. She blinked at him. My daughter? You know my daughter? Yes, he grinned. But first we have to get to your lab. Can you run? Of course, she nodded, starting to feel a little excited. Do we need some acting, David, like when you were a child? He laughed. Yes, that would help. Come on, we don't have much time.